And there is something around mapping the terrain that also can help us to see what is the landscape here. And part of the what is the landscape here is also to see what are some of the fundamental ideas that are in the world right now that might contribute to some of these divides. And also, what are some of the fundamental ideas that are in the terrain of facilitation? When we do this facilitation work, some of the handholds, like some of these very practical ideas, even though they're conceptual at first, but they're really practical ways of, here is a lens that I can use to look at the world when I facilitate, and that can help me to understand human processes, human systems, because in the end, we're just in the human systems kind of business. So, how many of you facilitate for a living? Like you do facilitation work as your job? How many of you facilitate during your work? So you have another job, but you do a lot of facilitation of meetings or other processes. Okay. So in the facilitation work that we do, either whether it's a consultant, an external facilitator, or if we do a lot of facilitation in our jobs, often what happens is extremely simple, but it's really hard to do. And we're bringing humans together. We're helping them to have productive conversations, to work on some complex challenges, because they need to make progress on some of these complex challenges. We will talk about complex challenges today and tomorrow. So this is, you can see this as a first half of a teach. And it sounds straightforward. We get people to have productive conversations on really tough challenges so that they can make progress. And sometimes the reason they call us in is because they run out of other options. They say, well, I give up. I try to hold the meetings in always the same time, it doesn't work. Or there is a manager, there is old school enough that runs the meeting in a certain way and it just doesn't work. But it's open enough to say, can we try something different? Can we try to meet in different ways? And sometimes we come up against the resistance, like what are these ways and what are some of these ideas and thoughts that are behind the ways in which we normally meet, or the organizational culture, or the managerial kind of culture of giving orders to people, command and control, and from this command and control, wanting to have very creative teams. How come I'm giving more and more rules to people and they don't come up with creative ideas? Maybe I should give them a bit more rules, right? That's my wish sometimes. We'll speak about individual preferences too. So I'm gonna talk about some of these worldviews, mapping the terrain. Some of these worldviews, what is this kind of, what are these ideas coming from? I don't need to tell you about the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution because we're all here and it's the water we're swimming in. I just want to highlight a couple of things from the perspective of complexity and history of science. And believe me, I can make history of science exciting for you. Just try me. Yes, just try me. So very simply, some of the underlying ideas, and there is a lot of research behind it. There's also a lot of thinking behind the differences between a mechanistic kind of understanding of the world and a living systems understanding of the world. Let's go one step at a time. Obvious enough, the scientific revolution, Newton, and then these ideas applied to the industrial revolution, they were great achievements and they were really groundbreaking at the time. We found regularities in nature and we found ways of identifying causes, linear causes for linear effects. So you can identify if I flip a switch, something will happen. And these laws of nature are timeless. Newton was saying, it's a timeless law. It's not time sensitive, meaning it will not change. Gravity is the same all the time. And that also means that these laws of science that we found in the Industrial Revolution are general, meaning what happens here should work over there as well. And that works extremely well when you have a laboratory environment where you can control all the variables, for example. Or when the world is predictable, so that from regular causes you can predict the effects. And that works extremely well, for example, when you design machines, because you can put a purpose to a machine. You can design from the outside. Here's what the machine is supposed to do. You control all the gears and all the cogs, and you let it do what it does best. Now, this kind of thinking brought us so much progress, so much a bounty of innovation. We live longer. Technology has made our lives so much better. The trouble comes when this thinking infuses some of the nature of some human social systems that actually work in different ways. When we use that paradigm to design human society, institutions, when we use some of those rules and some of those ideas to rule nature. Let's try and use this linear mechanistic systems thinking to bend nature to our will, bend society to our will. Let's design an algorithm that forces us to interact in a certain way in social media, for example. And the examples are many. Now we have these messy kind of living systems, the social systems. And the reason I'm saying they're messy and living is because they're non-linear. The interactions between these social systems, between these agents in social systems are non-linear. They're evolving over every time. And what that means is that the system is always in a different state, and even the rules of the game change over time. So you cannot apply the rules of yesterday to the system today, especially when the systems are highly volatile. And the solutions for the problems in a living system need to be context dependent. We will talk more about this also tomorrow as well when we talk more about complexity. But these living systems are self-organized, and context is everything. So what that means that these systems are self-organized is that they create their own rules and they have an intelligence of their own, and sometimes to force a purpose from the outside doesn't work. If you look at it from a mechanistic system, you want to put a purpose on a social living system, it doesn't work, or people fight back. Your CEO tells you, you should be more motivated as a team, and you say, actually, no, I have my own will, I have my own motivations. And you cannot command and control a system from the outside too much. And I think we've seen that, for example, with managerial cultures, when we have a desire to put a command and control kind of paradigm into a living system that is self-organized. I wonder if there are examples that you can think of when we try to put square pegs into round holes. I don't know if you know that expression, when you try to use a certain way of thinking, this linear mechanistic system, for systems that are actually living, networked, self-organized. I wonder if you have an example available. Can we just name a few examples if you have them for diversity of?
Reforms of the public sector.
Yeah.
I think in much of the Western world, but
yes.
At the very least in Denmark, where people are used to working in a culture and with a calling, and now suddenly they have to execute all these things that can be measured, and they have to measure it, and
that's a great one.
They lose their motivation.
Thank you. And also I want to mention performance measurement. My clients often struggle with performance measurement. You have these performance reviews that are coming from above, and actually they kill motivation, and they actually go against the very things that you wanted to measure. People game the system, people don't care. People try to game the system to reach those indicators, and in reality they're even the wrong indicators. Can you mention some other examples? Yes.
Can you repeat that? I didn't.
Subsidies for fossil fuel industries and climate catastrophe.
Yeah. And I saw your
system.
Sorry?
The school system.
Yes. Also, and again, it goes with, pedagogy, learning objectives, maximizing, going for efficiency, and then you kill the learning, for example, or you're not up to par with.
Working within the budgets of the year before in changing environments.
Yes. And COVID smacked us in the face with complexity and uncertainty, and people want to hold on to last year's budget, and the world is changing faster than the yearly cycles. Yes, that's great. Let's hear.
The world economy.
Can we have a 3-day training? Yes. Do you want to say more about that? Like that the economy is predicated on that mechanistic systems?
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
you can go into it, but all of us as a resident also when I say that, so it's just...
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, the way how it is organized and thought comes from a mechanistic view, and
Yes.
still it's also people doing it.
Yes, that's a good one. Do you want to mention yours?
Food systems, agriculture.
Yes,
Permaculture.
absolutely. And that's maximized for efficiency, and then sometimes you force nature into some forms of efficiency, and nature just doesn't respond to your plans. Last one?
Yeah, the healthcare system or medicine in general.
Yeah.
These rules apply to our bodies too, but
Yes, absolutely. So these are some of the examples in which it's everywhere, right? There's the water we're swimming in, as we were saying before. These are some of the ways in which we can highlight how this paradigm, let's call it in lack of a better word, is infusing so many of our systems. And I want to point out that there are some things for which this way of thinking is super helpful. Also, I want to acknowledge that it works really well for certain things. The problem comes, the examples that you mentioned, is when you have these mechanistic lenses applied to living systems and they backfire. For example, they create environmental pollution, or they create loss of motivation, or they create budgets that don't align. You have another point?
Yes, I don't have an example, but I want to raise the question, aren't we in the attention system also? That attention is what we are competing for in the digital system. So we are trying to get attention for customers, for ourselves.
And we're competing for attention with these, like algorithms, for example, or with the marketing approaches. Yes. So imagine that as a facilitator, you are trying to work with human energy. And I don't mean energy in a spiritual sense. I just mean simply like human creativity. People have motivation. People have intelligence. People have ideas. And you want to collect some of that energy, some of these ideas, some of that enthusiasm, that skill, to accomplish things. So imagine an organization, or imagine a group of humans. It could be your colleagues in your team. It could be people inside an organization, an NGO, eco-village, corporate, whatever you have. You want to try to organize these human systems. The chaotic lenses are one way in which we can look at how do we work with these, how do we work with the complexity of human systems. So one way to begin would be to think of, the world is messy. We want to create some control, some order. So we want to give some rules to people as a way to encourage them to collaborate in certain ways. We want to set some boundaries, guidelines, some order in place as a way to create structures, tell people where the boundaries are. There is a set budget. But we're working with a human system. It is possible that the first response we get is some resistance from a human system. I'm creating some rules, and the human system kind of reacts, pushes back. What options do we have?
Pressurize.
Right! I love that. Put more control in place. Let's put more rules. Why are these people like following along? Let's create more rules. And imagine a human system like a democracy where you're creating some order and there is a little bit of social discord and there is a little bit of pushback. And then let's go fully into a dictatorship where we create more rules and we completely devoid people of human agency. We tell people what to do and we create more structure. What would happen next? Revolution. Before the revolution, and I know that democracy is a hot topic, but also you can imagine that in management as well. It happens in microcosms as well. You see apathy. People are checking out. People are demotivated. Like you mentioned motivation also in organizations. People are checking out because you're creating so many rules that they stifle human creativity and innovation. If you have a system in place where you need certain rules because the job is always the same, like in the linear kind of thinking, you have a production line and you don't need people to think outside the box, even that can work. Whether it's ethical or not, or whether people want to work like that for their whole life, that's another question. But in a human system, when you want to tap into human creativity, we are called as facilitators to tap into human creativity. That really doesn't work as well. And people can check out, as you said, and then revolution. And then people rebel against that. And then we can flip over to the other side, to the opposite extreme of control, which is the chamos, which is a Greek word for the destructive chaos. This is where hell breaks loose. People are rebelling. People want no constraints at all, and people want to use their own initiative without any constraints, without any power over them, without any kind of control. Now, we can also use chaos in a more productive way, meaning we can allow people to self-organize and use their creativity, and we can try and dance between chaos and order so that we give just enough rules and enough minimum specifications. We can give people just enough structure and enough rules so that we can liberate human creativity. How do we do that? A couple of examples. Think of what is the minimum set of rules that you can create for people so that they can actually go ahead and do it, so that people can tap into their motivation, use the best of their creativity. It is okay as a job of leadership to say, here is what the boundaries are. The budget is that. We don't have more, sorry. But within that, here are some specifications. And this is also the way in which we try to coach you. For example, when we teach you a method, we say, these are some of the boundaries. Go ahead and do it yourself. If you need some help, ask us. And this is also the job of leadership that is in between chaos and order, because you want to tap into the human creativity, especially in very complex, fast-changing environments where you need to innovate, you need to always stay ahead, and you need to let systems self-organize. So in between chaos and order, you want to do this kind of leadership work, and this is where the participatory practices sit. And I want to make a point that in a predictable, mechanistic world, you don't need to host conversations. If somebody has the answer, if it's a production chain where people already know their tasks, somebody has the answer, you don't need to hold the dialogue. It's a waste of their time. If somebody already has a mechanistic, expertise-driven answer, completely in the realm of control, we don't need to dialogue. Somebody has the answer. We don't need to dialogue about how to fix that broken switch or that broken light. To make good use of our time would be to host conversations, especially in between chaos and order, or in between chaos and chamos, to allow for a leadership in between chaos and order, and create these minimum structures. What that looks like would be, as I said, the minimum specifications that you want to create, and the practices that we have here, the methods that we teach and that we practice together, are really designed to do that. People want to have good conversations. We teach very simple, that's like the World Cafe, the open space, that liberate human creativity. Just enough structure for people to have the good conversations. They go ahead and do it themselves. And no more. If there is one rule that you can cross off the list, cross it off the list. Just minimum, some people in liberating structures, they call it the minimum specifications. And liberating structure. You create a structure that liberates people. Just enough structure and no more. And no less. In between, do you want to speak to the three different ways of chaos, between chaos and Camus, that is the space of activism kind of leadership?
And what was this one called again, just before we continue?
Management, in between order and control. Between order and control, you have management. They already know the rules. They only have to execute. We'll speak more about that tomorrow as well in terms of complexity. You need to optimize and make things more efficient. And in between chaos and Camus, you have activism leadership, where you want to tap into even more creativity and even more innovation and even more wilder ideas. And I mean wild in a positive sense as well.
Yes. How do you know the rules are the right rules?
Yes, how do you know?
Who decide? Is it the leader or the group?
So the thing about complex systems is that you only know by trying, and you see what the system does, how the system responds back. Is it working? Are people throwing Molotov bombs? Then maybe it's not. Maybe they're not the right rules. What are people checking out with apathy? Maybe we put so many constraints in place. But really, there is actually a point about living systems that you will only know when you interact with the system and you see how the system responds back. And you can test for resonance. Is the system coherent? Is the system working in unison? Is the system working in a way that is flowing effortlessly, for instance? I'm sure you have your tests for, is it working? Yes?
Yeah, I was thinking if in a complex or living system, if there are any rules at all, because for me there are only interconnections and relationships. There are no rules. And if you are talking about rules, then you bring duality, which is very mechanistic, to the complex system, which is more like interconnected to each other. So maybe there are no rules in the system at all.
That is a great question. And I know a few things. There are scientific simulations at least suggest that you can have very simple rules even in complex adaptive systems. Like a flock of birds, if you give them 3 rules, you say match speed with each other, stay at a distance from your neighbors, try to avoid collision. You can give them very simple rules, and then the flock of birds does these wonderful patterns like the murmurations of starlings, for example. But we don't know, to be fair, I don't think we know enough about living systems just yet, because nature is still obscure to us. It's a really good point.
Yeah, and also the scientific thing is also Newtonian science.
Yes.
Science is mostly mechanistic, so
Yes.
you can't explain living system using the mechanistic.
Exactly. And even the social systems, it's really hard to map them. You have to work with them, because the moment you map them, sometimes there are actually shortcomings as well. What comes up? Thank you, that's a really good point. I saw other hands up.
I've just seen time.
Yes, we're aware.
When stewarding an ecosystem, we don't call it, at least where I'm from, we don't call it rules, we call it principles. So we try to recognize the principle of the system and wait for the feedback of the system when we steward.
Yes. Thank you, that's great.
I think it was just to point out that in complex living systems there are certain principles, right? So there is this element of emergence, there is this element of feedback loops.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you.
And non-linearity.
Yes, thank you for that.
So you said that in a mechanistic system, there's no need for dialogue, right?
Well, let me rephrase.
I have a
In a
question.
mechanistic system, if you have control over all the variables, if somebody has already set a purpose for that system, if people know what to do, if you need to make it just more efficient, and there is an expert-driven answer, most often you might not need dialogue because you don't need space for creativity, which is more the realm of complex living systems.
So my question would be, or the question that came up for me was, is there such a thing in our world as a mechanistic system at all? Because it feels like it's more a mechanistic fantasy that we apply to complex.
Right. Yes. And actually some theories suggest that mechanistic systems are just the ones that we have invented because we have created machines. Nature has not.
Because even a clock or a watch, you can have conversations around aesthetics or around beauty.
Yes. Yes, and that goes into the meta level of, you know, the aesthetics, for example.
Yeah, just follow up on that, but aren't we living in like a hybrid living and mechanistic with the way we work with technology today? Because technology is mechanistic and we work like everyone has a phone. We have,
yes.
So it's not one or the other.
Yes, absolutely. And in living systems, we have mechanistic things that help us. I guess if you think of teams of people, you can think of a living system in which we use technology to help us. But then you host conversations with people more than you host conversations with clocks.
Yeah, but you host them through technology.
Also through technology, absolutely. And you work with the constraints of that.
On how things are working with that technology.
Yes, and those are
working.
Absolutely, and those become some of the constraints that you have to work with. I saw some other hands up.
Yeah, just relying with rules or principles which are emerging. I think that we as humans, at least, we need some, to create a safety space, we need some references that you can call principles, so we can play inside. So creativity needs a safe space.
Yes.
So absolutely. Even if they evolve over time, but at some certain point of time, we need those three simple principles.
Yes, and actually that's a great point because it flows into one of the next things that I wanted to say about facilitation and the work that we do in hosting these conversations is that we want to create some of these minimum rules that create enough sense of safety in a group and that it liberates human creativity. Another thing that I wanted to point out was we will talk about this tomorrow as well. Also to notice what are your preferences, because everybody has very strong individual preferences around each of these four. I just want to name them again in case you couldn't read them. Chamos, which is this destructive chaos, then order and control. And it's important to realize in the ways in which we work with teams that we each have our own preferences and that shape the way in which we facilitate. That's why never host alone. Host with somebody who's also different from you normally, and to notice how you host yourself and you host other people and how that shows up in your preferences, because that is also one of the foundations to see the next teach, the fourfold practice, to notice what our preferences are and what our default ways of working are.
Can I add one thing?
Please.
And maybe just to ground what Marco just said, there's many different debates and thoughts in the different art of hosting in other communities about activism leadership, participatory leadership, management leadership. These are all important in different styles that may or may not be needed. And the question is, when facing these divides, when facing what we see in the world, what kind of leadership, what kind of potential, what kind of approach is needed when? And that's kind of our core question. It's not this leadership is better, this thing is better, this is needed, this is not, but it's really looking at myself and seeing what have I been trained to imagine as the way to approach something. Is that actually useful in the vibe that I'm facing? If it's not, where do I need to go to build capacity to actually face those divides? And where might I be able to, if I was only trained as a managerial leader? I'm actually incredibly useful in some contexts, but there's others where not. So how can I broaden my understanding of myself and the world by looking at what's actually needed? And if it's continually not working, maybe that's also saying something, right? It's like, why does that keep not working? So yeah, we're trying to bring in this question and bring in this idea of being in practice.
Absolutely.